Welcome to Sword and Shield, the official podcast of the 960th Cyberspace Wing. Join us for insight, knowledge, mentorship, and some fun as we discuss relevant topics in and around our wing. Please understand that the views expressed in this podcast are not necessarily the views of the U.S. Air Force nor the Air Force Reserve, and no endorsement of any particular person or business is ever intended.
Good morning. Welcome to another episode of the Sword and Shield. I am Chief Master Sergeant Chris Howard, and today I have...
Hello, Major Jeremy Leader. I'm the commander of the 50th Network Warfare Squadron.
Welcome, sir. I appreciate you taking the time today to talk to our listeners, the fellow gladiators out there. And just kind of wanted to give everybody a little bit of insight. You and I used to work together years ago. Where was that?
At Ninth Ops, Vandenberg, so the Reserve Associate Unit for the 614th Space Operations Center. Well, at the time, it was the Joint Space Operations Center. Now it's the Combined Space Operations Center. So kind of a hub for space command and control. There's quite a few of us former Ninth officers now in the 960th Cyber Wing.
Right, yeah, we picked up another one over at one of our other units over the 854. One of the things that we really wanted to talk about today was some of your insights, right? So on the civilian job side, what do you do?
So as a civilian, earlier this year in July timeframe, I took a job as the Deputy Director of ECX, which is Cross Mission Ground Communications Directorate in Los Angeles Air Force Base. Again, it's currently known as the Space and Missile Systems Center. There's a lot of change happening right now with Space Force. So a lot of redesignations and things. So can't speak on some of the final namings, but SMC will definitely be part of whatever ends up becoming part of Space Systems Command.
Right. I know from an outside observer, being an individual that used to work within space as a whole, right? So working prior to becoming a reservist, I worked in a space unit, and then went to the JSPOC or 9 stops with you, and then I moved on to eventually work in the range out in Colorado Springs. As an outside observer, I'm really interested in how space is evolving, and I was kind of hoping that we could kind of talk about not necessarily specifics, but just our new sister service coming on board. What's that looking like, and some of the nuances of those changes?
Yeah, again, a lot of change with the birth of the Space Force. Actually, the official birthday is December 20th, 2019. So they're going to have a birthday coming up, 20th of 2020. And I know that they're looking at doing a bunch of different activities and events to kind of help solidify and create that unique culture and identity for the Space Force, but then also pay homage to the history that we have from the Air Force.
Right.
Yeah. So the current plan, there's basically deltas and garrisons and three main branches of the Space Force, and that's going to be your Space Operations Command, your Space Systems Command, which would be the second, and then Space Training Command, or STARCOM.
Okay.
The only one of those three has been officially where they've sent out kind of like, here's our deltas and garrisons, and that's the Space Operations Command. And I believe that was about last month, where they came out with a bunch of the different deltas and how the wing squadron construct would align to the delta construct.
So when we talk about that specifically, right? So we hear these new names, we hear deltas and garrisons. When we take Air Force lingo together, right? What is the equivalent to a squadron then, I guess?
That's a good question, because it's not necessarily always a one-for-one.
Okay.
But I would say for garrisons, that's pretty much, translation of a base.
Right.
Or a physical location. Whereas a delta, so when you think, wing, group, squadron, and the hierarchy there,
right,
one of the things that they wanted to do is kind of flatten the organization.
Okay.
So you'll have typically multiple squadrons, but no real, so you could say a delta is kind of a group or a wing.
Okay.
Or if if the Air Force were to, remove the group layer and just have wings and squadrons, that's kind of like it is with deltas. And
right.
Yeah, it is kind of hard to, when you look at some that have quite a few organizations in there, and then some that only have, or some that are really, really vast. And so it's really not the size of the delta. It's the core mission and what they're
Okay.
kind of focused on.
Gotcha. So, I mean, yeah, I think that even the Air Force has played with removing the groups and kind of flattening out the organization, removing overhead and some of the bureaucracies, I guess, that come with too many layers, right?
Mhm.
So I think that'll be interesting from an outside perspective to see how the Space Force evolves, how that structure looks, and what the pros and cons might end up being. Um, what other changes would you say that's really significant with Space Force compared to the Air Force, right? So I'm trying to get our listeners to understand a little bit more about this sister service.
Um, well, there are quite a few differences, but I think, personally, the strengths that I see are a lot of our similarities,
Right.
especially when you look at the overall push for, you know, agility, innovation, boldness. Those are really the touchstones that General Raymond's laid out for the Space Force, and those are they're very much in line with the Air Force, and you look at how acquisition processes have evolved over time, and we've gone from being technology added in late into a program that's technology creep, and it's going to cost more time and money. And watch out, program managers, and to let's go demo stuff. We're ready to
Right.
to try new technologies, bring on new industry partners. Um, so it's the willingness to try new things. I think is again, I don't think it's a difference from the Air Force, but it's one of those things that helps set the Space Force and Air Force apart from a lot of other
Right. Going from
components.
traditional acquisitions programs, and we're talking, Cold War, post Cold War era, before we get into,
Mhm.
more of today. Those acquisition lines were years, right? And we're just trying to speed that up so that we can meet the speed of technology, right?
Yeah, and we even see this from the reserve, the cyberspace wing side, where Lieutenant General Hawk from 16th Air Force recently said, one of the biggest problems that we have is getting out from our current infrastructure,
Right.
our current network infrastructure. Moving on to that next thing is really hindered by the stuff that we're dependent on today. And again, that's kind of across the board. When you look at whenever the Air Force wants to do a new aircraft or a new spacecraft, it's always, well, what's currently out there, and
Right.
it can become a contentious battle to move to whatever that next thing is, or even try the next thing. So, like I said, the willingness to do that climate's changed, and I will say there's always been different roads to do stuff quick. It's just, again, there has to be the money and the willingness to give it a shot,
Right.
and 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 space definitely has that history of trying some of those things out. But now that it's becoming a more contested environment, more people are in the game, it makes it even more important that we put some extra focus there.
Right. No, and I think that leads to two pieces I was hoping to discuss today. Is we look at some of the similarities of cyberspace versus space. I would argue, and this is just me personally, not my position or necessarily anybody else's opinion, that space and cyberspace are the two domains that are consistently contested versus some of our other domains,
Mhm.
right? So I think that puts us in a unique position, knowing that no matter where we're at, we're pretty much in some kind of a battle, right? I don't know what your opinion on what that looks like.
Well, go back to the National Defense Strategy, and I believe the term was global competition. I think there's a lot of activities that kind of fall into a gray space,
Right.
and the way you phrased it, kind of like a continuous battle. There's always pressures. There's always a push and pull. So actually, before I went out to SMC in July this year, I worked at the Pentagon doing a committee on the foreign investment in the United States, where we would look at when foreign companies invest in U.S. companies and the security implications
Right.
that has for the Air Force. So We talk about economic warfare. That was definitely at the forefront of that. I got to see quite a lot of things and different perspectives. And I think not only, talking about Space Force today, but I think the underlying current is, talk about the value proposition of reservists and all the different experiences and things that each one of us brings to the fight. It's just a broad swath that, and each person's unique. So you never know, what job you had is going to help out for future jobs. And so I love the organization and structure of the Air Force and Space Force for the career fields, et cetera, and all that lining up. But I definitely think there's a huge advantage for getting those different experiences into the organization.
Right. And when we talk about contested, we're not talking about necessarily, malicious adversaries. We're talking about just general, right? So when we look at space, you have the commercial aspect of it, then you have the national aspect of it. And similar within cyber, we have industry involved, we have individuals involved, and then of course we have, adversaries or traditional adversaries in there. So I think that, from a cyberspace perspective, as we see space grow, I'm kind of hoping that we see some leading edge stuff that leads into cyberspace, right? Space is actually a little bit further than we are, as cyberspace is fairly new as a domain, and we progress.
It's a great point, and a lot of change. It talked about infrastructure changing kind of underneath our feet. You look at how we move to a lot of cloud environments, all the great work that folks at Cloud One, Platform One are doing here in San Antonio. And then in terms of technology development, commercials moving out. Starlink, you look at these space-based mesh networks where you may not have to rely on ground nodes if all your nodes are in space. So I think the key thing from a warfighting perspective is having options. Right. So if that, when we talk about resiliency, having options is definitely all part of that resiliency.
Right. Just to pick your brain a little bit, when we look at it from a global network perspective, right? Now we really gray the space between space and cyberspace, don't we? I mean, you hit the point of that. Where is a node, right? Location is really unimportant when it comes to a global network, but when it comes to infrastructure and then also
in targeting,
targeting as well, right? It starts to come into play, right? I guess sitting in both of these positions, right? One is a reservist within cyberspace, and secondary as a civilian within space. Where do you kind of see those demarcation lines, just theoretically?
A lot of them are I would say categories that we create ourselves. In terms of when, heck, you can even go back to the OSI layers and layer 8 era, right? So we create these artificial constructs to help organize information,
right?
But I would say again, there's a lot of different options out there, and where that it's only at where we want to define it. So if we want to change the calculus, then we can, and I shouldn't necessarily let those artificial boundaries stop us from developing new technology, especially when you start looking at even farther down the road, like the 20-year, the 30, 50-year quantum technology.
The way things are going to continue to interact, how much just in the number of years that we've served, how that's all changed, right? It went from a very small amount of data, but important data moving, to vast amounts of data, to include very important to minute items. It's insane how fast this is growing, and I can only imagine the acceleration pace that we're going to hit as technology continues to grow.
I used to have a 2400 baud modem and a BBS where I would have text-based computer games, and people would dial in to play them, and it's come quite a long way.
Right. And we were joking before we started the podcast about some of those old school sounds, right? That modem sound, and how that's going
Hey,
away.
I still have a Hotmail account, and when I tell people this, I get these weird looks, like what's wrong with Hotmail? And I guess it's like one step above AOL, but not quite.
Right.
It's just kind of telling my age.
Don't tell anybody.
Okay.
I've got a Hotmail account somewhere too.
See,
So-
cyber secure.
There you go. No, and I think that that's really where I see cyberspace and space being very symbiotic, especially currently even and into the future. What other things do you think, from your perspective, sir, are relations with Space Force and cyberspace?
Well, again, some of the skills and just that knowledge is foundational, and so I would say as reservists and civilians, you never know where some of the experiences that you have either in the reserves or on your civilian job will benefit the other, and just that cyber experience in general is very foundational. And as we move to new technologies, it's still important to understand kind of where it came from,
Right,
and
the baseline.
I
Right.
mean, we joke about the old technology now, but when high tech stuff
Search to fail.
starts to fail, you need to have some
Right.
foundational backups there.
Right. I mean, almost feels like you're recruiting for Space Force, right?
Oh, always.
No, but I think that holds true, sir. Right. So when we look at baseline, let's even look at cyberspace for a second and take a step back. It was based out of comm,
Mhm.
right? Communications. Same thing with space, predominantly, right? When we talk about early space, we're talking about satellites, and even today, the robustness of space and how contested it is with the vast amount of equipment in space just for the purpose of moving data from point A to point B.
Mhm.
As well as other portions of those platforms. The basis of the 1 and 0 hasn't changed, right?
Well, this is kind of when we get to the quantum stuff, but
Right.
it has the potential to.
Gotcha.
But yes, general information theory, Claude Shannon, your theory is safe for now.
Gotcha. Right, and it will continue to evolve, but how we move ones and zeros,
Mhm.
as that evolves, we go faster, and then we start to pack it in different ways and different formats, and using different algorithms to speed up the transfer as well as the amount of transfer per second. I think that those skill sets that we learn in space and cyberspace go hand in hand, and really lead us to the next piece. What else can you kind of tell us about Space Force and where it's kind of heading?
Well, I don't know if folks have heard Major General Kreider talk about, they want Space Force to be born digital. You typically get a lot of questions about what does that mean?
Right.
But then when you work with young airmen and see just their technical fluency and a lot of the new technologies and how a lot of that can change and accelerate, decision space
Right.
and how we use data analytics today and that we didn't use in the past. So it's really just having that foundation again to then lead to a lot of these higher tech systems, very, very complex, but if every airman has just that foundational level of digital fluency,
Right.
it just enables us to move farther, faster.
Right.
So it's a great initiative, and I think they're starting it right, from the training up, and so I
Great.
look forward to some of those.
So when we worked together at
changes.
Nine Stops, the big push back then was space situational awareness,
Mhm.
right? And then now you work. Your unit has a vast amount of intel individuals in it.
Mhm.
So when we put those two pieces together, at least in my mind, we talk about situational awareness and that born digital piece. How important do you see the intel piece with cyberspace and space?
It's huge. So when you go back to the original space situational awareness (SSA) construct, it came out of it was the 2007 ASAT test where, it didn't work out well. It kind of caused a stir with, oh my gosh, what happens with when people start blowing up satellites?
Right.
So SSA was all about where things are when. That's your situational awareness from.
Right.
But I would say that it's a lot more than that. So having intel folks involved is really important. I've used the term electromagnetic situational awareness. So,
Okay.
And then from terrestrial or in space. So I know this is a huge domain, and ACC is looking at setting up an EW wing, but having people that can sort through all that information or build systems that can do that in short order, and
Right.
and give battle ready decision criteria to decision makers is really, really important.
Right. No, I definitely see that there's a lot of value added there, right? In an effort to quickly analyze the environment we're in through keeping a sustained situational awareness, whether it's space situational awareness or if we're talking about cyber situational awareness, right? Both of these environments are consistently changing throughout the every moment, right? When going back to space situational awareness, that single piece of metal of a blown up satellite traveling at high speeds can make a huge difference if it's on a trajectory to hit a communication satellite, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing within cyberspace, understanding, what kind of systems are out there in the domain that may be causing other issues. And that allows for leaders with that situational awareness to make those decisions in a quick manner with that analysis piece. And that's where that intel troop comes in, correct?
Yes. I definitely think, again, intel, when you look at how those airmen are trained traditionally with
Right.
the Air Force, it's such it's a different type of foundation than the cyber training foundation, but still equally important to take a lot of disparate information, coalesce it, fuse it into something meaningful and timely. And I think
Right.
that skill set will always be in demand, not only in the Space Force, but in the corporate world.
Right.
It's just as we get more and more systems, there's always more and more data. I mentioned data analytics, and the ability to be able to sort through so much data. It definitely takes a very logical, intel focused
Right.
type troop.
It's almost like mind numbing how much information has to be looked at in any given moment to make even the simplest decision. So I think that having those analysts get some of those tools that as we see information progress and systems progress, so that they can provide real time data and real time situational awareness for leaders is going to be interesting to see how that progresses. What else do you see is the future of Space Force and maybe some of those interactions with cyberspace?
Well, I would say that Space Force right now is really, really small that in terms of like how they're transitioning. So it's very we'll just say maneuver over mass, so very focused on creating effects not only for combat commanders but for our international partners.
Okay.
And but in terms of how those two worlds really collide, space is very dependent on a very dependable, organized infrastructure.
Right.
And so in my civilian role, it's really about making sure that we modernize and maintain the communication capabilities, because if you can't control your satellite, and then you can't really do quite a lot in space. So
yeah, it's just a floating rock, right?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. And hopefully it's not running Windows XP, because that's a whole nother subset of problems that we'll get into in some other time.
Yes, sir. Right. And from a cyberspace perspective, right? I know that sometimes we simplify what a satellite's doing as just a router in the sky. But it's amazing how much different things that can happen and how important those two pieces are when we talk about that global network. I didn't know if you had any kind of parting shots or ideas that you wanted to share with our listeners today.
Well, I think the important piece is that, again, people always try to be the best at the job that they have, hone those skills, because you never know how they're going to be beneficial in other areas. So be it your reserve job or your civilian job,
right.
A lot of those cyber intel type related skills can be used by both the Air Force and the Space Force. And I will say the Space Force is hiring, right? So you look across the board, they're hiring civilians, and again, the partnerships that we have with industry are huge. We're creating partnerships where none existed in the past. And so if people have great ideas and want to do startup companies, we're planning seed funding for so many of those. And so it's just a great opportunity, great time to get into the space business.
No, I agree. I think that this is a great moment for us to have this conversation, because as Space Force, is born essentially, right? We're hitting that 1 year mark. It's in its infancy, but it's not infant in its capability, right? It's definitely one of the higher speed services coming right out of the gate. Has a lot to offer.
You have to be high speed to get into orbit. So
right. Yeah. It's
prerequisite.
There you go. But we're able to see a lot of changes, and it leads to a lot of opportunities. And the connection between cyberspace and space is just, infinite. So really appreciate your time, sir, today. I really appreciate the sharing what you know, and kind of helping some of our cyber troops out there kind of understand where space is going, and some of those connections. So
thanks for having me.
And thank you, sir.
They're the future, so make sure they know what's out there.
Yes, sir. Well, Gladiators, appreciate your time. Thank you for listening today. Wish you the best. Thank you for all you do, and have a great day.